What if the most dangerous kingdom in human history wasn't Babylon, wasn't Rome, but a place most people have never even heard of? Enoch saw it, and what he recorded was almost too terrifying to survive. There is a name that almost never appears in Sunday sermons. It doesn't make the highlight reels of biblical history. You won't find it on the walls of most churches, and your pastor has probably never preached a full message about it. But if you were to sit down with the ancient text of the Book of Enoch, the same writings that Jude quoted, the same visions that shaped how the earliest followers of God understood the cosmos, you would encounter something that stops you cold. A kingdom, a civilization, a seat of power so rooted in darkness that what came after it, Babylon included, was almost a pale imitation. We are talking about the world that grew up in the shadow of the Watchers. The civilization that sprouted from the union between fallen sons of God and the daughters of men. A world the book of Genesis barely sketches out, but one that Enoch documents in enough detail to make your hands tremble. This is not mythology borrowed from neighboring cultures. This is scripture-adjacent revelation, preserved for centuries, hidden in plain sight, and it describes something the human mind naturally resists. Because once you understand what this kingdom actually was, the flood stops feeling like tragedy and starts feeling like mercy. Genesis 6 gives us the outline. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. That's Genesis 6, 1-2. Most people read past it. They treat it like a strange parenthetical, a few awkward verses before the flood narrative gets going. But those verses are not a footnote, they are the headline. They describe the founding event of the most corrupted civilization this planet has ever hosted. The Watchers, 200 of them according to Enoch, who descended on the summit of Mount Hermon, did not simply take wives. They initiated a transfer of forbidden knowledge. They taught men how to forge weapons of war. They revealed the secrets of sorcery, of root cutting, of enchantments. They showed women how to use cosmetics for the purpose of seduction and manipulation. And Enoch is precise about something that often gets glossed over. This wasn't a gentle falling away from God's order. This was a deliberate, organized rebellion, a curriculum of corruption delivered by beings who had stood in the presence of the Almighty and chose, with full understanding of the consequences, to abandon their station. What followed was not a slow moral decline, it was an explosion. The giants that were born from these unions, the Nephilim, grew to sizes the text describes as staggering. The Book of Enoch calls them 300 cubits tall in some manuscript traditions, and while the numbers carry symbolic weight, the underlying reality is consistent across multiple ancient sources. These were beings that did not belong in the natural order. They consumed everything. They turned first against animals, then against men, then, in a detail that should arrest every reader, against each other. Violence did not just increase, it became the organizing principle of society. And here is what most people miss entirely. This was a kingdom. Not just chaos, not just random wickedness spreading through an ungodly population. The Nephilim and the civilization that formed around them had structure, hierarchy, and territorial dominion. The Book of Jasher, which is explicitly referenced in the canonical scriptures, in Joshua and in 2 Samuel, describes how the giants held regions, how they ruled over populations, how the earth was effectively divided between different lines of corrupted power. This was governance built on terror, on supernatural strength, on knowledge that God had never intended for human hands to possess. Babylon would one day build a tower to reach heaven, but this first kingdom didn't need to build upward, because heaven had already come down to them in the worst possible way. The fallen ones were present. Their offspring walked the earth. The knowledge of the divine had been twisted and weaponized, turned against the very humanity it was meant to protect. And the result was a world so thoroughly saturated with corruption that Genesis 6:5 describes it in terms that feel almost impossible to absorb. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Every inclination, only evil, all the time, not occasionally, not mostly, completely and without interruption. You have to let that land. God looked at what this first kingdom outside Eden had produced, this fusion of angelic transgression and human complicity, and the grief of it moved him to act in a way he had never acted before and would never act again in quite the same way. The flood was not a punishment handed down from a cold, distant judge. It was the response of a creator, watching his creation being devoured from the inside by a power that had declared open war on everything he made. The Book of Enoch makes something else vivid that the Genesis account leaves in the background. The angels who fell knew exactly what they were doing. Enoch 6:3 records their oath on Mount Hermon. They swore together, binding themselves to their decision, knowing full well the consequence. This was not ignorance, this was revolt, calculated, deliberate, irreversible revolt. And the kingdom it produced was the physical expression of that revolt, built on stolen knowledge, on violated order, on the deliberate desecration of the boundary between heaven and earth. If you have ever felt that the surface reading of Genesis leaves too many questions open, if you've sat with those early chapters and sensed there is a depth there the text is only partially revealing, then I want you to know there is a resource that goes far deeper than anything you'll hear on a Sunday morning. Our premium illustrated biblical mystery guide, The Forbidden Book of Enoch. What it reveals about the Watchers, giants, and the world before the flood is exactly what it sounds like. It is a serious, visually rich, chapter-by-chapter journey through what Enoch actually recorded, cross-referenced with scripture, with archaeology, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, with sources most people never knew existed. Those who have read it describe it as permanently changing the way they read Genesis, like a door opened that can never be closed again. The link is in the first pinned comment below. If this kind of truth matters to you, this guide was made for you. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do it right now. This is the kind of content we bring you every single week, going into the places most Bible teachers are afraid to go. To understand why this kingdom was more dangerous than anything that came after it, you have to understand something about the nature of knowledge, and what happens when knowledge that belongs to God alone gets handed to creatures who are not prepared to carry it. There is a reason the Garden of Eden had a forbidden tree. Not because God was withholding something arbitrary, not because he enjoyed keeping humanity in the dark, but because certain knowledge reshapes the one who holds it. It doesn't just inform, it transforms. And when the Watchers descended and began transferring what Enoch calls the eternal secrets, secrets that were preserved in heaven, meant only for a redeemed and glorified humanity, they didn't just give humanity information, they rewired the entire civilization. Think about what Azazel taught, because Enoch names him specifically. Enoch 8:1 says, Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, weapons and vanity in the same breath, the means to destroy bodies, and the means to capture souls through desire, delivered together as a package. That is not coincidence, that is strategy. Azazel understood human nature well enough to know that external violence and internal seduction, working in tandem, would unravel the moral fabric of a civilization faster than either could do alone. And then there was Semjaza, the leader of the 200. Under his direction, the Watchers taught enchantments, root cuttings, the resolving of enchantments, and astrology. They taught the reading of the clouds, the signs of the earth, the knowledge of the sun and moon. Some of this might sound almost harmless from a modern distance, star reading, weather patterns. But understand what this represented in that world. These were the secret mechanisms behind reality, the principles by which the invisible realm interacted with the visible one. When that knowledge was extracted from its proper context, from covenant relationship with God, and handed to people who had no framework for carrying it rightly, it became a set of tools for domination and manipulation rather than wisdom and worship. The Book of Jubilees, one of the most important extra-biblical texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, adds a layer here that sharpens the picture considerably. Jubilees 5:1-2 echoes Genesis but with additional urgency. It describes how the angels who fell began to instruct their children, the giants, in all manner of sin, and how the earth was defiled by their deeds. But what Jubilees emphasizes is the transmission. The knowledge didn't stay with the Watchers. It was passed down to the Nephilim, and through them, It began seeping into human culture at every level. It became embedded in the way people built, in the way they fought, in the way they worshipped, in the way they understood their place in the cosmos. By the time of Noah, several generations had grown up knowing no other world. The corruption wasn't a foreign element they could identify and reject. It was the water they swam in. This is what makes this kingdom categorically different from Babylon. When Babylon arose, it arose within a post-flood world where God had reset the conditions of human life, where the direct physical presence of the Nephilim had been eliminated, where the surviving human population had descended from a man who walked with God. Babylon's evil was serious, and Scripture treats it with gravity, but it was human evil, ambitious, proud, idolatrous human evil operating within natural limits. The kingdom before the flood operated outside natural limits. Its architects were supernatural beings with direct knowledge of heavenly realities. Its population had been biologically and spiritually altered through the Nephilim bloodlines. Its cultural inheritance was a set of forbidden techniques for manipulating the very fabric of creation. You were not dealing with humans who had drifted from God. You were dealing with an entirely new kind of civilization, one that had been seeded by design to become ungovernable by any force short of God himself. 2 Peter 2:4-5 captures the weight of this when it says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people." Peter links these two events, the imprisonment of the fallen angels and the flood, as part of a single divine response to a single coordinated catastrophe. They are not separate stories. They are two chapters of the same judgment. Jude 1:6 echoes this with striking precision. "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day." Abandoned their proper dwelling. That phrase is not metaphorical. These beings left the realm where they were stationed and entered a realm where they did not belong. And in doing so, they created a kingdom that reflected their nature, a civilization that existed outside its proper order, that had stepped outside the boundaries God established, and that by its very existence was a declaration of war against the created structure of reality. There is something almost unbearable about sitting with that. We are not talking about a society that slowly forgot God over generations, the way so many civilizations have done throughout history. We are talking about a society that was built from the foundation up, as an alternative to God's order. It wasn't that they rejected the Creator, it's that they replaced him with the Watchers, with the Nephilim, with a hierarchy of corrupted supernatural power that stood where God's authority was meant to stand, and demanded the same reverence, the same fear, the same submission. That is why what Enoch saw terrified him, not because the evil was simply large in scale, though it was, but because it had a coherence to it, a logic, a throne. And that throne was not in Babylon. It existed long before Babylon was even a name on anyone's lips, in a world that is now buried under thousands of years of silence and floodwater. What Enoch preserved was not just a record of evil, it was a testimony about the nature of God's sovereignty, that even when something rises to challenge the entire structure of creation, it does not catch God off guard. He saw the Watchers descend, he saw the Nephilim rise, he saw the earth fill with a violence so complete it defies description, and he did not panic, he grieved. Genesis tells us that plainly, and that grief is holy and real. But he did not scramble. He already knew what would be required, and he already knew the one man through whom he would carry the human story forward into a world that the flood was about to make new. Noah is the man everyone knows. The ark, the animals, the rainbow. Those images are so familiar they've almost lost their weight. Children draw them on Sunday school worksheets. They appear on nursery walls. And somewhere in that domestication of the story, we lost the most staggering thing about Noah, that he was one man standing upright in the middle of a civilization that had been architecturally designed to make uprightness impossible. Genesis 6:9 says Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. That phrase, blameless among the people of his time, has layers that most English translations don't fully carry. The Hebrew word used is tamim, And it doesn't only refer to moral purity, it also carries a meaning related to being whole, complete, unblemished in one's natural constitution. Several ancient commentators and scholars who have worked closely with the Hebrew text have noted that this description may be pointing to something beyond Noah's character. It may be pointing to the fact that Noah's bloodline had not been contaminated by the Nephilim corruption that had spread through so much of the pre-flood population. Think about what that means. If the Watcher's intervention had been going on for generations, if the Nephilim had been multiplying and intermarrying with human populations across vast stretches of the ancient world, then finding a man whose lineage remained untouched by that corruption would have been in itself an act of divine preservation. God didn't just find a moral man. He had been guarding a lineage. He had been keeping a line intact through which his promises could continue to flow because he knew what was coming, and he knew what would be needed on the other side of it. The Book of Jubilees speaks to this with a clarity that is sometimes startling. It describes how Noah's grandfather, Enoch, yes, the same Enoch who walked with God and was taken without seeing death, had been recording, warning, and bearing witness to the catastrophe unfolding around him. Enoch didn't just observe the fall of the Watchers passively. According to the text that bears his name, he was sent as a messenger to the fallen angels themselves to announce their judgment. God used Enoch to carry a verdict to the very beings whose rebellion had produced this kingdom of terror. And what Enoch brought them was not an offer of negotiation, it was a sentence. Enoch 13:1-3 describes Enoch writing out a petition on behalf of the Watchers, not because he agreed with them, but because they begged him to intercede. Even the fallen ones recognized that Enoch had access to God in a way they had permanently forfeited. And God's response delivered back through Enoch was unambiguous. There would be no peace for them. Their petitions would not be received. They had chosen their path with open eyes, and the consequences would be eternal. It is one of the most quietly devastating passages in all of ancient literature. Supernatural beings, who once stood in glory, now reduced to asking a mortal man to carry their desperate plea to a God who had already rendered judgment. But here is what threads through all of this, and connects it directly to why this kingdom was uniquely dangerous. The Watchers corrupted not just behavior, but the very structure through which humanity was meant to receive truth. Before they fell, angels were messengers. They were the conduits through which divine communication moved between heaven and earth. When the Watchers abandoned that role and became the architects of a rival kingdom, they didn't just stop carrying God's messages, they began carrying counterfeit ones. They taught a version of cosmic knowledge that imitated the real thing closely enough to be seductive, but was distorted at its foundation. This is why the prophet Isaiah, speaking centuries later, would use the language of Babylon as a symbol of exactly this kind of spiritual counterfeit, a system that presents itself as wisdom, as enlightenment, as access to the divine, but is built on the inversion of God's order. Isaiah 14, which speaks of the fall of the son of the morning, echoes the same architecture. Pride, the ambition to ascend above the Most High, the desire to establish a throne that rivals God's own. These are not new sins Isaiah is describing. They are the original sins of the Watchers, playing out again in a new civilization, with new names on the same old rebellion. What the pre-flood kingdom pioneered, every corrupt empire after it has imitated. The methods evolved, the geography changed, but the spiritual blueprint, the idea of a human society organized around power stolen from heaven, knowledge twisted away from its holy purpose, and a hierarchy of dominion that refuses to acknowledge God as sovereign. That blueprint did not drown in the flood. It survived in the memory of the survivors. It survived in the spirits of the Nephilim, which Enoch tells us became the demons that roamed the earth. And it surfaced again and again and again. Babylon was a revival, a second edition, a re-attempt at what the pre-flood kingdom had pioneered, which is exactly why Revelation uses Babylon as its ultimate symbol for the final expression of human civilization in rebellion against God. The writer of Revelation understood that the story of Babylon is not just about a city in Mesopotamia. It is about a spirit, the same spirit that first organized itself into a kingdom in the world before the flood, and that spirit's last stand before the return of the king. Daniel 2:44 says it plainly. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those other kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. The kingdoms built on the blueprint of the Watchers, whether pre-flood, Babylonian, or the final global system of revelation, all share the same terminal diagnosis. They are not built to last, they are built to fall. And the kingdom that replaces them is the only one that was ever going to stand, because it is the only one whose foundation was never stolen, never corrupted, and never subject to judgment. That is the ark Enoch saw. That is what his vision contained. Not just a record of ancient horror, but a map of the entire conflict, from the first unauthorized descent on Mount Hermon to the final resolution that the prophets could only glimpse from a distance, and that the Book of Revelation eventually names with shattering clarity. There is a question that doesn't get asked nearly enough when people study the pre-flood world. What did daily life actually look like inside this kingdom? We talk about the Watchers, about the Nephilim, about the violence and the corruption, but the tendency is to keep it abstract, to treat it as a theological category rather than a lived reality. Enoch doesn't let us do that. He walked through that world. He saw it with his own eyes. And what he describes is not a vague moral darkness. It is a specific, detailed, breathtakingly organized civilization that had built its entire existence around a set of principles that inverted everything God had established at creation. Consider the cities. Archaeological discoveries at sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, structures so ancient they predate anything conventional history expected to find at that layer of time, have forced researchers to reckon with the possibility that organized, sophisticated human civilization is far older than the standard timeline acknowledges. The site was deliberately buried. Someone, at some point, chose to conceal it. And its carvings, its pillars, its strange symbolic imagery point toward a religious system that was not primitive. It was highly developed, cosmologically sophisticated, and deeply concerned with the boundary between human and divine existence. Whether or not Göbekli Tepe is directly connected to the pre-flood world, it testifies to something the Book of Enoch has always claimed, that what came before the flood was not barbaric, it was advanced. And advancement in the hands of a corrupted civilization is not a blessing, it is a weapon. The Sumerian king list, one of the most ancient written records in human history, describes kings who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the flood swept over the earth. After the flood, the reigns dropped dramatically, to lengths that match human lifespans more recognizably. The document treats the flood as a real historical dividing line. A before and after that restructured the entire nature of human civilization. And the kings it lists for the pre-flood era are not presented as ordinary men. They are presented as figures of almost supernatural stature, which aligns with uncomfortable precision to what Enoch and Genesis both describe about the Nephilim and their offspring who held dominion over the earth. What was worship like in this kingdom? Enoch gives us glimpses, and they are disturbing. The Watchers did not simply corrupt human behavior, they inserted themselves into the place of God. The reverence, the ritual, the sacred architecture of human spiritual life, all of it was redirected toward them and toward their offspring. This is the origin of what many scholars call the ancient divine king tradition. The idea that the ruler is not merely a political leader, but a mediating figure between the human and the divine, possessing power and knowledge that ordinary humans do not have access to. That tradition didn't appear out of nowhere in Egypt or Sumer. It was imported from a world where beings who actually possessed supernatural power had actually ruled directly over human populations. Paul's letter to the Ephesians suddenly reads differently in this light. Ephesians 6:12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Paul was not speaking metaphorically in the way modern readers often assume. He was describing a hierarchy, a structured, organized, tiered system of spiritual authority operating in opposition to God. And that hierarchy did not materialize after the flood. It was established before it, in the kingdom the Watchers built, and it has been operating in various configurations ever since. The Genesis Apocryphon, one of the remarkable documents recovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, expands the story of Noah with details that suggest the ancient Jewish community who preserved these texts understood the pre-flood kingdom in exactly these terms. The text describes the alarm that Noah's unusual appearance caused at his birth. His father Lamech feared the child was the offspring of one of the Watchers, because the child radiated a light that seemed to belong to another order of being. Lamech went to his own father Methuselah, who went to Enoch himself to seek clarification. Enoch's reassurance that Noah was indeed Lamech's son and that God had chosen him for a purpose is presented not as a minor family matter, but as a pivotal cosmic confirmation. The purity of Noah's line was not assumed. It was verified through the man who walked with God and saw more of heaven's realities than any other mortal before the flood. This is the context in which God's instructions to Noah have to be understood. When God tells Noah to build an ark and to bring in animals according to their kinds, that phrase, according to their kinds, appears repeatedly in Genesis 1 as the marker of God's created order. He is essentially saying, "Preserve what I made, preserve the distinctions I established." The kingdom of the Watchers had been erasing those distinctions for generations, mixing what God separated, crossing boundaries he set. The ark was not just a survival vessel, it was a preservation of the original created order, a floating declaration that God's categories still held, that what he called good at the beginning was still worth saving, and that the corruption layered on top of it by the Watchers did not have the final word. Isaiah 26:21 says, "See, the Lord is coming out of his dwelling to punish the people of the earth for their sins. The earth will disclose the blood shed on it. The earth will conceal its slain no longer." The pre-flood earth was soaked in blood. The violence Enoch describes was not occasional. It was systemic, institutional, woven into the very economy of that civilization, and the flood was God coming out of his dwelling. Not in anger divorced from justice, but in the terrible, holy precision of a judge who had given every possible opportunity for repentance, who had sent Enoch as a witness, who had preserved a remnant, and who now moved to stop a kingdom that, if left unchecked, would have consumed every last trace of what he had made and called good. The earth concealed its slain for a long time. The waters buried that world completely, but the testimony of what happened there, preserved in Enoch, echoed in Jubilees, confirmed in fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, has a way of surfacing, century after century, as if the record itself refuses to stay buried. The flood ended, the waters receded. Noah stepped out onto a world that was simultaneously familiar and utterly new. The same earth, the same sky, the same God, but a civilization wiped so completely from the surface that only 8 human beings remained to begin again. And yet, if you follow the thread carefully through the post-flood narrative, something becomes clear that is rarely spoken about in straightforward terms. The kingdom did not end with the flood, not entirely, not in the way most people assume. The physical Nephilim were gone. The Watchers who had descended were bound and imprisoned. Enoch 10:4-6 describes the archangel Raphael being sent to bind Azazel hand and foot, to cast him into the darkness, to cover him with rough and jagged rocks in the desert of Dudael, where he would remain until the day of judgment. The 200 who swore the oath on Hermon were sealed in their valleys of fire, their appeals denied, their petition rejected. The architecture of the pre-flood kingdom, in its most visible physical form, had been dismantled. But Enoch 15:8-9 introduces something that most readers of this story have never been told. It says this, "Now the giants, who have been born of spirit and of flesh, shall be called upon earth evil spirits, and on earth shall be their habitation. Evil spirits shall proceed from their flesh, because they were created from above. From the holy Watchers was their beginning and primary foundation. Evil spirits shall they be upon earth, and the spirits of the wicked shall they be called. The spirits of the Nephilim did not die when their bodies died. They became something else. They became what we now call demons, disembodied, restless, drawn to human flesh, unable to find rest, condemned to roam the earth until the day of final judgment." This is not a minor theological footnote. This is the missing piece that explains the entire spiritual landscape of the world after the flood. The demons that Jesus cast out, that the apostles confronted, that Paul warned the Ephesian church about, their origin, according to Enoch, traces back to the physical death of the Nephilim in the pre-flood world. They are not a separate category of fallen being. They are the disembodied remnant of the hybrid civilization that God drowned, and they carry with them in their very nature the corruption of that first kingdom, the drive to inhabit, to control, to distort, to lead away from God. Luke 11:24-26 takes on a different texture when you understand this background. Jesus says, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places, seeking rest, and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. Seeking rest. That phrase is not incidental. It reflects precisely what Enoch describes: spirits that are constitutionally homeless, cut off from both the heavenly realm from which their fathers came and the earthly realm whose natural order they violated. They roam, they seek embodiment, they do not find peace, and they return when they can to the familiar territory of a human soul that has left itself open. This is the long shadow of the pre-flood kingdom. Its physical structures are gone. Its geography is buried under sediment and ocean floor, but its spiritual offspring are still present, still active, still operating according to the same fundamental drive that animated the Watchers from the moment they swore their oath on Hermon. The drive to insert themselves between God and humanity, to corrupt the image of God in man, to establish a rival order in the place where God's authority belongs. Post-flood civilization picks up this thread almost immediately. Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, maps out how the earth was repopulated after the flood. And almost within the same breath, Genesis 11 introduces Nimrod, who is described as a mighty hunter before the Lord, a phrase that in the Hebrew carries a confrontational edge. The word translated before can carry the sense of in the face of or in defiance of. Nimrod's might was not a gift consecrated to God. It was power exercised in the presence of God as a kind of challenge. And the civilization Nimrod built, Babel, Erech, Akkad, the beginning of the Babylonian system, bore the unmistakable fingerprints of the pre-flood blueprint. The same hunger for a kingdom without God, the same drive to accumulate power through unified defiance, the same impulse to reach the heavenly realm through human means, this time a tower rather than a union between fallen angels and women, but rooted in the identical spiritual logic. You begin to see why the Book of Revelation, written at the far end of the biblical timeline, uses Babylon as its symbol for the culmination of human rebellion. Because Babylon is not just a place. Babylon is the name of the spirit that has been trying to rebuild the pre-flood kingdom ever since the waters receded. Every empire that has exalted itself above God, every system that has demanded the worship owed to the Creator, every throne that has positioned itself as the mediator between humanity and the divine, they are all revisions of the same original. The dangerous thing about this kingdom was never just its size or its violence, though both were staggering. The dangerous thing was its ambition. It aimed at something permanent. It aimed at replacing God's order so thoroughly, so deeply, so at the level of human DNA and human knowledge and human spiritual instinct, that there would be nothing left to return to. The flood interrupted that project, but the spirit behind it has never stopped trying to complete it. And if Enoch is right, and Jude and Peter and Jesus himself suggest that he was, then understanding what that kingdom was, how it operated, and what it is still trying to accomplish is not a matter of historical curiosity. It is a matter of spiritual survival. Because the war that began on Mount Hermon before the flood has never fully ended. It simply moved underground, and it has been fighting from there ever since. There is a reason this material was preserved through centuries of suppression, copied by hand in desert monasteries, buried in clay jars near the Dead Sea, carried forward by communities who understood that these texts were not peripheral, but central to understanding the full scope of what Scripture is actually describing. The people who preserved Enoch were not fringe mystics chasing forbidden knowledge for its own sake. They were people who believed with everything in them that the war Enoch witnessed was real, that the enemy Enoch named was real, and that the God who judged the pre-flood kingdom and promised to one day bring all kingdoms under the authority of his Son was absolutely unalterably real. They kept the record because they believed the record mattered, and the fact that you are here, still reading, still asking the questions that most churches refuse to ask, that suggests you believe it too. What Enoch saw before the flood was not meant to stay hidden forever. It was preserved precisely for a time like this, when the questions are pressing harder, when the surface answers are no longer enough, when God's people are ready to look deeper. If this video opened something in you, our premium illustrated biblical mystery guide, The Forbidden Book of Enoch, what it reveals about the Watchers, giants, and the world before the flood, will take you further than any single video ever could. It is the kind of resource you return to, rich, thorough, visually alive, and anchored in Scripture. The link is in the first pinned comment. Don't pass it by. Thank you genuinely for watching this all the way through. Subscribe if you haven't yet, leave a comment with what struck you most, and keep watching. The next videos are already on the screen waiting for you.